Hi, you are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donica, the only public ladies' room you can enter anytime without ever waiting online. I'm your host, Dr. Donica Moore. We'll be having real conversations with real women about really intimate issues. They may be embarrassing, sad, or funny, but they will always be interesting and informative. You know, like the best conversations you've had in ladies' rooms with your best friends, or total strangers and a physician. Please join us. Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. You've seen my guest today many times on television, in public speaking, and I want to tell you a little bit about her. But first, I want to tell you, I did something yesterday afternoon that I haven't done in a really long time. I cleared my schedule and I read a book in one sitting, and it was written by my next guest, Dr. Jennifer Ashton. Now, like way too many thousands of Americans, Dr. Ashton is a woman who's experienced firsthand the impact of a loved one's suicide. Unlike most of them, she has a national platform as Chief Medical Correspondent for ABC News, from which she's chosen to speak out broadly about life after suicide, which just happens to be the title of her new book. When her ex-husband killed himself soon after their divorce, her world and that of her two children was shattered. Despite the difficulties of discussing such devastating loss publicly, Dr. Ashton recognized the potential impact of talking about her experience in an attempt to destigmatize suicide, as well as to give voice to her grief. In addition to sharing her own family's journey, Dr. Ashton includes interviews with and stories from others who've lived through the suicide deaths of their loved ones. But we can't ignore the numbers, even though we're talking about very personal stories. And one thing I always say about statistics, if it happens to you, the incidence is 100%. But statistics from the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention show us that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. In 2017, there were an estimated 1.3 million suicide attempts, and 47,173 Americans died from suicide. That's an average of 129 suicides per day. 300 of them, 300 physicians, die per year from suicide. Now, male physicians are 1.4 times more likely to die of suicide than other men, and women physicians are 2.7 times as likely as other women to die from suicide. In general, men die more commonly from suicide, about 3.5 times more often than women. And if I haven't reached you yet with the numbers and the statistics and the impact, let's talk about money. Suicide and self-injury cost the United States about $69 billion annually. Now, in addition to her role on ABC, Dr. Ashton is in private practice as an OBGYN, as well as a frequent guest on The Doctors, The Dr. Oz Show, and many others. She's the author of 3 other books, The Body Scoop for Girls, Your Body Beautiful, and Eat This, Not That, When You're Expecting. She's a big believer in education, obviously as a physician. She has a BA and an MD from Columbia University, from which she also completed her master's degree in human nutrition. And in addition to being board certified in OBGYN, she's also board certified in obesity medicine. And of course, I could go on and on talking all day about your various qualifications and expertise, but people would rather hear from you than me. So welcome to the ladies' room.
Thank you, Donica. My God, it's so nice of you to have me on, and I just love your show, so I'm glad to be talking to you today.
Well, thank you. The last time I saw you in real life was when you were getting the Red Dress Award from, was it Ladies' Home Journal?
Yeah, Women's Day Magazine.
Women's Day Magazine, sorry.
Yep, and the American Heart Association, yep.
That was right. Fabulous, and that was a fabulous dress, I have to say.
Thank you.
So, of course,
I rented it. Actually, I rented it.
Oh.
Rent a runway.
Oh, that's a great plug for them. I never did that because I always worry that it's not going to fit or it's going to be too tight in the hips or, anything.
Well, let me tell you don't get too excited about the plug for them because thank God it worked out, but I didn't have any success with anything after that. So.
Well, I imagine it's great for something like that where you're very specific that you need something red. I actually was the speaker for New Jersey Heart Association for their Go Red for Women luncheon a couple of years ago. And they were so excited that I wore a red dress. And I said, well, it's the Red Dress Awards. And she said, well, last year our speaker wore a brown dress. So what occurred to me that night I saw you, aside from all the incredibly accomplished women and the great speakers and the great entertainment, is how many different red dresses there are. I don't think I saw any two women who were wearing the same red dress.
I know, it was crazy.
It was really a great experience. And I think that is also applicable to our topic today, talking about suicide. There are no two people who have the same experience dealing with a loved one. And I want everybody who's listening to just spend a moment and think about all the people we each know in our own lives who've died from suicide. You know, I did this exercise. I lost a very good friend a couple of weeks ago to suicide, Dr. William Tedford, who was the founder and president of the National Professionals Network. And it was really shocking, but it was not my first experience. I lost an aunt when I was in college to suicide, who I was not close with, geographically or emotionally. But I remember still feeling devastated that I should have called, or I should have reached out, or I somehow should have known. And I related to so many of those feelings in your book. So start from anywhere and just tell us what made you decide to put this on paper.
Well, two things, or I should say people. My children, Alex and Chloe, who are now 19 and 20. They were 17 and 18 when Rob killed himself 2 years ago. And they said they wanted me to talk about it, and that they felt really strongly that my platform had the potential to help a lot of other people who are going through what we're going through. And they thought it was really important. And I initially did not want to talk about it publicly because, as you know, a lot of doctors and nurses and people in the healthcare profession, we would rather be the ones giving the help than asking for the help. And that's what
I resemble that remark.
Exactly. And also, despite the fact that I'm on national television every day, I'm really a private person with what I perceive to be my own pain, vulnerability, weakness, failure, however you want to describe it. And I think that, as you said, when people lose a loved one to suicide, whether it's a friend or a relative or a coworker.
Wait a second, I've lost you. We've lost the sound. Just a second. Are you there? I can't hear you. Are you there? Now we got you. We got you. Okay, great.
Okay.
We'll edit that out. We'll edit that out.
Do you want me to try to just quickly go to my settings and try to see if the microphone is on?
I think we're good with this. We'll just edit this part out. Go back to what you were just talking about when we lose a loved one.
When you lose a loved one to suicide, the range of emotions is very different than with other types of death. That's not to say it's better or worse. It's not a competition or a contest. It's just different. And, I had tried my whole life to be the one helping other people and not, dwelling on my own kind of issues. And I realized after Rob's suicide that if I was going to try to heal so that I could help my children heal, I was going to have to face those issues head on. And so I talk about that process in the book, along with the stories that I think are really inspiring of other survivors as well.
What I was most surprised about with the book, quite honestly, is I wasn't really looking forward to reading it. I did because I know you and because we were going to have this conversation. And I expected it to be very depressing. And to your credit, your voice really comes through in the book. And it was very uplifting. It was really surprising. So, of course, the first thing you kind of say is we're focusing on life after suicide. So we're focusing on the life part, which I thought was very empowering. So I think this applies to everybody who's dealt with any kind of grief or any kind of death or any kind of loss. The second thing, of course, that struck me, because I knew you, but also because I had walked part of your journey before, which is the divorce and the timing of this coming immediately on the heels of the divorce. So I was feeling like you didn't really have time to mourn the loss of your marriage. And, I heard you loud and clear when you said in the book that you viewed, as somebody who was such an overachiever, you really viewed the divorce as a failure in a way. And divorce is a loss, no matter whether it was for good reasons, bad reasons, long in coming, whatever the situation. So how do you balance, those two issues?
Well, I think that ironically, and thank you, Donica, for all of your kind words, and just also with the attention with which you read the book, which really means a lot to me. I think that ironically, the divorce and the death, there were times where the divorce helped my recovery from the death, and there were times that it hurt, and there were and vice versa, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So, I didn't really have a lot of anger towards Rob because of his suicide, because I had already processed my anger towards him during the last year of our marriage. So,
and you were in couples therapy together, and it sounds, I want to meet your therapist. She sounds amazing. She's like the star of this book.
She is amazing. And part of what I really wanted to do in the book is share what my children and I have learned from her, because not that that substitutes for someone having their own therapy, but a lot of people have a lot of obstacles to that for many reasons. And so I just wanted to share the things that I've learned from her, because that they've been considerable and incredibly impactful. But I dealt with my anger towards Rob at the end of our marriage. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, I was already maxed out at anger, believe it or not. So that by the time we finalized our divorce, we were amicable and we were respectful to each other, and we were friends, and that had never changed. We just didn't want to be married to each other anymore. So for me, the grieving from his death was really two-pronged. It was the incredible pain that I had on behalf of my children, and the pain that I have that I don't have their co-parent with me anymore for the rest of their lives. Their father, the person I created them with, is no longer here. And I give people a lot of credit if they decide to be solo parents, but I did not ever decide to be a solo parent. And so for me to think about never having their father around to share any of their ups and downs with is that's what I grieve.
Well, I liked how you distinguished in the book between being a single parent versus a solo parent. I've also, of course, was just crying, literally crying outside on my back deck reading this book when you talked about the three friends of Rob's who stepped up and told your kids they now have three dads. And I thought that was incredible. But if nobody else ever reads this book, you've already benefited lots of other people, because I've taken away and already had several conversations with people about this wisdom from your therapist about this concept of multiple truths. So I think that, and I had never heard of that before. So talk about that.
I had not either. So this is a concept in psychology, in particular in the world of grief, in grief counseling, whereby you can have profound pain and sadness, grief due to the loss of someone, and at literally the same moment, you can have incredible joy, happiness, excitement, like the positive feelings for another reason in your life. And one feeling does not negate the other. It doesn't invalidate the other. It doesn't diminish the other. They can coexist, and they do coexist at the same time. And why I thought that was so important for people who are, grieving the loss of a loved one, especially due to suicide, but any death really, there can be so much guilt when we go through positive things in our life, like how can I be enjoying this when that just happened?
Mm-hmm.
And the concept of multiple truths really kind of puts that to rest. It really explains why we shouldn't feel that way. There are other things that we have to deal with, but that guilt is not one of them.
Well, I think guilt crops up in many, many ways when we're dealing with any kind of grief. And I think the burden is sometimes greater as a physician. And you did talk about, this concept. And I know, we tend to second guess ourselves anytime we miss a diagnosis. But when we miss a diagnosis in a loved one, this concept that you talk about did I miss the signs of depression? And did I overlook the despair? And we did do another episode, I don't know if you had a chance to listen to it, where we talked to a woman who attempted suicide twice in her life. And I did want to share this with you because I thought this was really impactful. She said what she would like people to know who are survivors of a loved one killing themselves is, she said, I wasn't thinking about them at the time. All I was thinking about was my pain. And she said that at least in her case, she said you would be shocked at how sudden the decision was. It wasn't strongly premeditated. Now, obviously, in Rob's case, there were different factors going on. And obviously, he had another reason to be sad and to be depressed. So have you gone over that in every step?
I mean, well, you mean going back?
In your mind and just saying...
Well, the part about missing signs, especially when you're a doctor and you live with someone for 21 years, he didn't have any of the signs of depression that we learn about in medical school. He didn't have a single one of them. But in retrospect, when I say we had such an amicable divorce, maybe it was amicable because he was pulling away from life, whereas I just thought he was pulling away from me. Mm-hmm. I literally thought that he did not care that we were ending our marriage, because that's how, it was really no different than if I said, by the way, our favorite restaurant just went out of business, and he would say, well, then we're going to have to go somewhere else. That was the level of kind of reaction that he had when we decided to end our marriage. And I was so hurt by that, because I thought, wow, he really does not care. He just does not love me anymore. And maybe that was him pulling away from life. But I also learned from our therapist that to ask rational questions after an irrational act is not only not productive, it's literally in vain, because you can't understand an irrational act rationally.
I think one of the other things that really struck me is one of the women who you dealt with, who was a great source of support to you, and I forgot her name. She was involved with the military, and her husband was in the military. Yes. And I love what she said to you, because of course 22 veterans per day kill themselves. This is a huge issue in the military. And I started thinking, before you got there in the book, I started thinking, what does the military and medicine have in common? And then you answer that from Kim's comment, where I wrote this down because I thought it was so impactful. People in any profession which requires a decreased fear of pain and a decreased fear of death, so the military and medicine, are already at greatly increased risk of suicide. And then your therapist told you the two factors that really influence somebody's decision to commit suicide are their fear that tomorrow will be worse than today, so they lose hope in tomorrow, and also that they they lose a fear of death.
Yeah, and I think that understanding is really important in terms of prevention. It doesn't help the survivors that much, but I think it's very important for prevention. When you understand the insights, or what little insights we have into the people who are most at risk or most vulnerable, those things do come into play. And I think when you understand that someone who is at great risk of suicide is someone who's lost hope that tomorrow will be better, then that becomes a target for intervention for the people around that person who's suffering, to say, you're not alone. This will get better. You know, I'm sorry you're in pain, but to make them feel not alone and a hope for tomorrow, or to try to help them feel that way.
So that's a great segue into, we always like to give people tips and pointers. And thank God, the majority of people who are listening have not lost a loved one to suicide, although many, many have. But they know people who've been in that situation. And you talk about what helped and what doesn't help. I think people are so terrified of saying the wrong thing to somebody who's lost anyone. You know, thoughts and prayers is just not cutting it anymore.
No.
But we don't want to say the wrong thing. So I think many times we don't say anything. What is the right thing and what's the wrong thing?
Well, for sure, Donica, I learned who my true friends were, as did my children, and we learned who our friends weren't, and I'm happy to say that more the former than the latter. It does not help to hear someone berate the person who just killed themselves, or say they were a coward, or they were selfish, or, anything like that, because all I felt when people said those things about Rob was protective and defensive on his behalf, because he was clearly suffering and mentally ill in order to do something like that. So why would you, berate or attack or demean someone who's just lost their battle with cancer? This should be no different, right? So those kind of things do not help. It doesn't help to say, oh, well, I guess you shouldn't have gotten divorced. I mean, 60% of people get divorced and 60% of people don't kill themselves. So thank God. So, those kind of things are not helpful. What did help? It's so easy and it sounds so simple and simplistic, but my friends who just literally texted me without a question, without asking or waiting for a response, saying, hi, honey, I'm thinking about you, with a heart emoticon or something. That was really helpful. And by the way, the people that you're trying to support need support indefinitely. It's not like when we got to the 1 year mark, everything was miraculously better. And in fact, at the 1 year mark, a lot of people kind of went back, disappeared, and we were still going through stuff, and we still are going through stuff. So that kind of someone who's going to be there for the long haul, even just by texting, is super helpful. And you don't have to, we kind of know, I think, rationally as doctors, but emotionally maybe different. You don't have to say anything. You could just be with someone. You could talk about something else. You literally don't have to say anything. So I think it doesn't take much, but people are afraid of making a mistake. And to that, I don't know if you ever used this line. Back when we were residents, I used to say, to my interns when I was a chief resident, and we would have to go to codes and cardiac arrest, and I would say, even to lay people, I would say, don't ever be afraid if you have to start CPR on someone, because you can't hurt them. They're already dead. All you can do is help. So I would say the same thing to someone who wants to comfort someone who's grieving the loss of a loved one to suicide. You don't have to do that much. You just have to be there.
Yeah, you talked about in the book about milestones and how the Milestone Holidays are difficult. And Mother's Day used to be my favorite holiday of all time, because I was born on Mother's Day and I'm a mother. So it's just double, and I was the firstborn. So I made my mother a mother. So it's all awesome. But I have 3 friends who've lost children, and 2 of them were adult children. One was a teenager, to suicide. And it took me years to get up the car. I used to, call them or just text them on Mother's Day. And it really kind of put a damper on Mother's Day for me, because I felt almost guilty, feeling so happy. But I asked one of my good friends finally, does it make it more difficult for you if I mention him or if I bring him up? Because I think that's what we're afraid of. We don't want to make it worse for you. And she said, very, very non-judgmentally, and she appreciated the question, she said, it doesn't really matter if you mention him to me or not, because it's not like there's a moment or a day that goes by that I'm not thinking about him. And that really, really struck me.
Yeah. And, for me, it's ironic that you mentioned that, but, Father's Day is coming up, and I was asked to go to Montana with my boyfriend, and I said, that weekend, and I said, I have to be with my kids, which of course he totally understood, because not only is it a hard day for them, but now I'm, playing kind of that role, even though they've let me off the hook, as you read in the book, by saying, don't try to be a replacement for dad, because not only can you not do that, it'll make you less of mom. But, I just said I have to be with them that day. And so that's just another kind of example of how these holidays or milestones in life, they're in many ways forever changed when you lose someone.
Absolutely. What do you think is the most surprising positive thing to come out? First of all, your kids are amazing. Chloe especially, although I want to go bitch slap that girl at Lawrenceville who, was saying like, oh, you're so lucky, you get out of taking exams. She's on my list. But she, what I love about her spirit in particular is how she finds evidence of her father in other things that are happening. And it's totally beside the point whether that's really him or not really him that's making these experiences happening. But she's finding him, and she's trying to be the best daughter to him that she can be. And she's amazing. Yeah. Amazing. But what did you think out of all of this was the most surprising thing?
The most surprising positive is that Alex, Chloe, and I think partially by luck, partially because we all wanted to go in this direction, partially because of help, found this post-traumatic growth experience, which is this deeper understanding of ourselves and a greater appreciation for life and the relationships that matter to us, and the perspective and context that comes with that. And as the saying goes, death is the ultimate educator, and we don't take life for granted now. And when you meet someone who's battled cancer and they say, I didn't really start living until I was diagnosed, and you think like, wow, how did that happen? That's what post-traumatic growth is. And so, that to us is an incredible gift from Rob. We'd rather him be here, obviously. But it's a way that we all honor his spirit and are not living with anger and bitterness and resentment at the world.
I love what you said about grief being love. You don't mourn someone that you didn't have love for.
Well, I learned that from my therapist also. Trust me, I didn't know
you didn't invent that.
I didn't know any of these terms in psychology or these concepts before. But I think that when you think of, or when you hear things like that, at least for us, it really helped our healing process, because it's hard enough without the guilt, blame, shame, and anger. And a lot of what I share in the book kind of, just blast that out of the stratosphere, so people can hopefully just focus on the healing.
Well, I hope people focus on reading it. I know I certainly grew a lot and gained a lot from it. I think people will really benefit. I have it right here, Life After Suicide. Congratulations. And thank you for using your voice and your microphone to get out the message for so many other people, because this is really a public health crisis. And I
really appreciate that.
You're doing good. And I think any time we can use our negative experiences to help other people, especially your children, which is your whole, raison d'etre. I think that can really always help us move forward, not only as individuals and families and communities, but also as a society. So thank you. And thank you for joining us. Take care.
Thanks. It was great to be here.